want this shit. There are 44 million Ukrainians, and there is one Vladimir Putin in Russia who has chosen to decide their fate. It's day 7 of the invasion, perhaps a time to pause for a moment and look at a man who's now calling the shots on the entire world. He's gotten the entire world looking at Ukraine and imposing more sanctions on Russia. Putin isn't suffering, the people of Russia are suffering. But what's going on in Putin's mind at this point of a time? He's been called a tyrant and a dictator in the State of the Union address by President Joe Biden just about an hour ago. Why is he waging this war with all of the excuses? Is this about legacy? Is this about geopolitics? Is this about the national security of Russia? The answer lies in the Kremlin in Moscow, within the minds of a 69-year-old former KGB spy who is today the president of the Russian Federation, and a man whose war machine is now on the doorstep of Ukraine's capital.
In Moscow, the hammer and sickle is lowered for the last time, and an era comes to an end.
I am ceasing my activities in the post of President of the USSR.
The year was 1991, and on the day of Christmas, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, announced that the USSR had ceased to be. 15 republics that had made up the Union declared themselves independent, individual entities. The Republic of Ukraine had overwhelmingly voted for its independence.
The world calls the end of an era. Gorbachev's resignation and the last lowering of the Soviet flag that flew over the Kremlin dome were mourned by few of the people who had passed their lives under that flag.
Weeks later, Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Putin had quit the now defunct and one-time dreaded KGB and was on his way to St. Petersburg. His world lay shattered around him. His future looked bleak.
Клянусь при осуществлении полномочий президента Российской Федерации.
Decades later, as the president of the Russian Federation, he would call the Soviet collapse the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century.
По воле народа. Законно и мирно.
Who is Vladimir Putin? This former KGB agent, his aura very carefully crafted, meticulously drafted. Like in 2008, when he was Prime Minister, Putin, along with journalists, was visiting a wildlife reserve in Siberia when a tiger charged towards a TV crew. Before anyone else could react, Putin apparently shot the beast and sedated it with a tranquilizer gun. This was reported as a headline on Russia television, but the action was never captured on camera. Years later, in an interview to a Russian magazine, Putin admitted that the incident was staged. It was done to draw attention to a species under threat, he claimed. And that seems to sum up the driving philosophy of Vladimir Putin. Trained in the elite spy school of Soviet Union, he remains a master of misdirection.
The Russian Federation, there will be no war. We don't want war, but we will not allow violating our interests.
The force driving Vladimir Putin seems to be his desire to make Russia great again. A throwback to the days of the Tsars and even to the Soviet Union, when Moscow held control over the largest political entity that stretched from Western Europe all the way across the Asian landmass to Cape Dezhnev on the Bering Strait. In the process, Putin has gathered powers that has rendered him Tsar of all he surveys, while undermining the institutions that strengthen democracy. Russia under Putin is a totalitarian system where the parliament is toothless in its opposition. Over the years, Putin has managed to change and modify the rules eroding many of the key features of the federal system that developed when Russia became an independent federation. Imposing greater central control over the regions was one of the first reforms that Putin addressed on coming to power.
There was Alexander the Liberator and Yaroslav the Wise. We will have Vladimir, the underwear poisoner. That is how he will go down in history.
His detractors have been jailed, the latest and most formidable being Alexei Navalny, the leader of the Russian opposition. Before he was jailed, he had survived an assassination attempt. Many believe it was Vladimir Putin who had ordered his assassination with a Soviet-era nerve agent called Novichok. Navalny miraculously survived that attempt on his life, but soon lost his freedom and still languishes in prison on charges that are considered trumped up. Under Putin's regime, Russia's courts are said to lack independence, and they remain subject to political pressure.
They're offering them the chance to surrender, that they will be treated with respect and allowed to return to their families.
In President Putin's Russia, the media is no longer seen as speaking truth to power. TV stations are owned by oligarchs who are considered close to the regime. And the reportage has been accused of being consistently pro-establishment. So while thousands of Russians have bravely hit the streets to protest their country waging war with Ukraine, Russian TV channels have been towing the government line of justifying Putin's war in Ukraine.
Once again, I appeal to the servicemen of Ukrainian armed forces. Don't let neo-Nazis and Banderites use your children, your wives, and old people as human shields. Take power into your own hands. It seems that it will be easier for us to come to terms with you than with this gang of drug addicts and neo-Nazis who settled in Kyiv and took all Ukrainian people hostage.
30 years ago, when Ukraine declared its independence, it had the third biggest pile of nuclear weaponry in the world. That was its share of the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet Union. Only USA and Russia had more. But in 1994, Ukraine had willingly given up its entire stockpile for the sake of peace. Both US and Russia stood guarantors to Ukraine's peace, signaling that Ukraine will never be in need of such weapons. In 2014, Putin went back on the promise that Russia had made and ordered the annexation of Crimea.
Let's imagine that Ukraine is a NATO member. It is fully packed of weapons. It gets advanced attack, means like those in Poland and Romania, and it starts an operation in Crimea. I don't even talk about Donbass. Crimea is a sovereign Russian territory. Let's imagine that Ukraine is a NATO member state and it initiates a military operation. What should we do then? Should we fight against the NATO bloc? Did anyone think at least something about that?
The annexation of Crimea in 2014 stamped Putin's legacy as what began to be termed the gatherer of Russian lands. Vladimir Putin became not only the longest-serving leader in Moscow after Stalin, but also the first ruler since then to expand Russian territory. Approaching his 70th birthday, the president of the Russian Federation now seems to be consumed by a desire to reunify Ruski Mir, or the Russian order. A desire that would mean that Ukraine has to be brought back to the Russian fold, an association that stretches back 1,000 years of shared history. Never entirely untangled, the separation of identities remained turbulent to the day.
Уважаемые коллеги, вы видите, что западные страны предпринимают не только...
Dear colleagues, you see that not only are the Western countries engaged in unfriendly action towards our country in economic field, I'm talking about illegitimate sanctions everyone knows about very well. But the top NATO member countries' officials allow themselves aggressive statements towards our country as well. That's why I'm ordering the defense minister and chief of the general staff to switch the Russian army's deterrent forces into high alert mode of combat standby duty.
Putin's invasion of Ukraine is ostensibly to teach its leaders not to tango with the West. A warning to NATO to stay off Russian borders and to stop their eastward extension. But whatever be the reasoning, stretching from Putin's alleged megalomania to claimed genuine geopolitical considerations, the fallout is going to be harsh.
Important Russian banks will be excluded from the SWIFT system. We will also ban the transactions of Russia's central bank and freeze all its assets to prevent it from financing Putin's war. And we will target the assets of Russian oligarchs.
Overall, we'll be imposing asset freezes on more than 100 new entities and individuals. Next, on top of these financial measures and in full concert with the United States and the EU, we will introduce new trade restrictions and stringent export controls similar to those that they in the US are implementing. We will bring forward new legislation to ban the export of all dual-use items to Russia.
So I'm going to begin to impose sanctions in response far beyond the steps we and our allies and partners implemented in 2014. And if Russia goes further with this invasion, we stand prepared to go further as with sanctions.
The Western powers have hit back at Putin with a slew of sanctions. Even as Vladimir Putin continues to spill blood in Ukraine, Russians and Ukrainians are dying in war that has not much reason behind its cause. Europe stares at destabilization, Ukraine at ruin, and Russia at economic dilapidation. The ruble has tanked. The Russian stock market, facing a crash, has been shut for days. Most of Russia's $630 billion worth of forex reserves lies frozen. Europe has shut its airspace to Russian aircraft. The world is refusing to play sport with Russia, and the president of the Russian Federation has only upped the ante. Putin has ordered Russian nuclear forces on alert. No one knows what Putin wants. No one knows how far he'll go. The world watches in trepidation as life hangs in balance. And peace remains subject to the demons that plague the fantasy of a single man.